Hey everybody, Really here. I assume that if you've clicked on this video, you have come to hear what I have to say about spray painting dolls. Changing the color of the entire doll has its problems no matter what method you use, but almost all of them specifically have issues with the joints. Up until now, dyeing had been the method most likely not to get rubbed out of the joint so quickly, or using permanent marker in those spots. But since various parts of dolls are made of different materials, they very rarely ever dye the same color all over, so you end up having the blush areas to match anyway, even if you have been trying to avoid that method in the first place. But here, I'll tell you how you can spray paint any color or effect, evenly all over, even in the joints without it getting scraped off during posing. The one caveat being that you will need a steady hand. In fact, before I even list the needed tools and materials, I'm going to tell you the big secret so you can decide right here and now if you want to give this a try or not, or even watch the rest of the video. The trick is to carve and sand inside of the joint areas to make room in there so that the parts are not rubbing as the doll poses. In the tutorial, I'll go over it in detail how to accomplish this, but you'll need to trim a little bit from each surface inside of the joint. It's not quite as delicate as a procedure as you might think, so you're not as likely to accidentally break something as you might imagine. So don't be scared. They say fortune favors the bold, so if you're still with me, let's talk about what to use. Materials. Of course, you're going to need your chosen doll, or sacrificial one, an X-Acto blade, a Dremel tool, which is optional but makes things much faster in some areas than just using sandpaper, sanding files, which again, optional if that's easier for you to use, depending on the shapes of the areas that you're filing sanding in. Sandpaper, the grit doesn't really matter since whatever spray you use is likely to be leveling out the texturing, just, filling it in. Spray paint. Here, as far as I found at least, the sky's the limit. Metallics, glitters, enamels. I haven't run into anything yet that has been a problem. Though I haven't done tons of these yet. I've only done 5. Masking tape, if your doll has details that you need to protect. Like the hair. UV resin and a 280 or so watt UV lamp for the drying. Both of these are optional, but it's a very powerful tool if you use it right. So it's something that's a really great fix if you're having a trouble area. And the reason why you want a higher powered lamp is because some resins they won't dry very well with lower powered lamps. But once I got this lamp, it dried like anything that I had had troubles with. And lastly, you will need sealant. Don't forget that if you're doing something shiny, you'll want the high gloss sealant. I like Rust-Oleum clear gloss lacquer myself. So, step 1, de-hair if that's in the plan. If you're doing a reroute, that's easier done after spraying and drying. And wash your doll up with soap and water to get rid of any oils or dust. Step 2, trimming joints. We're getting right into the hard part. I'm going to do my best to explain and illustrate. It's going to be a little bit difficult because it's kind of hard to record these angles. For shoulders and hips, it's really easy because all you have to do is take your X-Acto blade and carve a little out of the torso around where the arms and legs meet it. So just keep moving the limbs around to check for parts that might be touching the rim in odd poses. And just keep trimming until there's still room there in all the areas as you're posing. I usually do trim a little bit off the shoulders themselves and the hips themselves rather than just inside the socket. But it's up to you whether you want to do that or not. And here are the hard parts, the elbows, wrists, knees, and ankles. This is what I was talking about when I said you need a bit of a steady hand. Usually the first thing one will notice if you've ever fully blushed a doll or tried to spray paint it before is that, say you're looking at the back of the knee, if you spray paint it straight like that, then when you go to bend it, the bottom lip there will scrape along the joint disc and remove the paint. However, even once you remedy that part, notice that the disc joint also sits flush with the calf that is gripping it from both sides. So the idea here is to create enough space inside the joint so that no part is going to touch or rub stuff off any other part. As so often is the case, it's not as hard or as scary as it sounds. Just hear me out. You do want to maintain structural integrity in such a small area, so you don't want to be cutting too much into any one place. What you do is just trim a little bit off each area, each side. We'll start here with the outer edge. Many dolls have this disc joint type with the forearm, hands, lower legs, and feet being made of vinyl. So at the bottom of the disc, where the edge of the outer limb would usually scrape, trim that opening a little, making sure to carve some of the vinyl inside where it would touch the wheel. Just enough to make sure that there's no edge anymore to do the scraping. Continuing with the nice, soft, easier to cut vinyl, go around the joint, cutting down, sloping inward, as shown in the video here. So that's one side, and now you want to carve the actual disc itself, a very thin layer all the way around the outside. Then both sides of the disc that would have been touching the inward sloped cuts. This way you're not trimming off a lot of material from any one place, but there's now plenty of room for your chosen coloring. Make sure you've done this for each joint, in both the most stretched pose and the most folded pose. Step 3, all over sanding. You should at least do a light sanding all over the body to make sure that there's some tooth for the spray to cling onto and be less likely to chip off in later years. And of course, you want to smooth out things in the joints, because just cutting the joints, you're going to end up with things being angular. Step 4, cleaning again. This is the one you want to be more thorough on. Soap or dishwashing liquid are fine. Just make sure to get all that sanding dust and any more oils off. And step 5, spraying. You made it to the fun part. It's time to put down the color and really get a good picture of what your project's going to turn out to be. Read the instructions on your paint carefully and follow them. Most have temperature and humidity ranges for optimal results. If not done right, the paint can discolor, cloud, bubble, or curdle. And also, it's always written in the instructions, but remember to work in a place with enough ventilation and cover nearby surfaces that you don't want to get paint on. For the first layer of the spray, you want to make sure that all the doll's joints are positioned at one extreme, so that the second spray, you move them to the other extreme to reach the rest of the areas that the first layer didn't get. And you see here I have it at the first extreme. You have to wait for the paint to dry to the touch before repositioning for spraying the opposite side, which in my experience, most sprays, it usually takes somewhere between 30 to 60 minutes, but I'll usually wait an hour just to make sure. You have to find some way to arrange to hang your doll for drying. If the head is off, it's easy to tie something around the neck peg and just perch the head on a pencil or something. But if you can't remove the head, I found that I can loop around in the thigh joint and find a good arrangement in there, especially since, we did some trimming in the thigh gap. Make sure to err on the side of spraying too lightly, because it's more difficult to correct it if you spray too much in one spot and it starts to run or drip. It's easy enough to add more later on. Now, before progressing any further, now that all the joints have a layer of spray paint on them, at this point you have to start masking the joints before doing any further layers or sealing, so that you don't get layers of stuff just building up and clogging the joints. And while you're working on it the rest of the time, if some does scrape off and you end up with some spottiness in the joints during this process, it's fine. Don't worry about it. I'll tell you how to touch up any little broken spots once we get down to the end of it. So step 6 is detailing. This is where you do any further layers, like if your spray paint was somewhat thin and transparent, you might want to spray more layers on it to make it darker or thicker. Or you might want to blush more details onto the doll. Whatever is in your plans. Then you are ready to move on to step 7, which is sealing. You'll have to pose your doll the same way you did for the initial spraying back in step 5 and mask all the exposed joints. I usually cut little pieces of tape, put them over the joint, and then use an X-Acto blade to trim it and also tuck it down in around outside of the joints. Then you spray with whatever you're using. Wait for it to dry. Once it's dry, remove the masking, flip the joints the opposite way, mask again in the newly posed joints, spray again, dry again, remove the masking again. And at this point, you're pretty much finished, but almost inevitably, you'll have to do step 8, which is touch-ups. At least for the first time or 2 or 3 or 4. I always have touch-ups to do. You may end up doing touch-ups for the rest of your life too. But yeah, usually at least one spot or two, I find I have to add a little bit more. Who knows, maybe a spot wasn't quite carved enough, or maybe something got snagged during masking, or any number of other possibilities. Doesn't matter. Here's how you deal with it. First, check all the joints, bending each of them both ways to see how many spots you'll need to patch up. You can eyeball it and see if it looks like there wasn't enough space, and if you'll need to do a bit more trimming. So do that if it's necessary. Now, all you have to do is just take your spray paint and a small disposable container, like I have these little shot glasses. Point the head of the spray into the container and cover the opening with your hand so that the paint doesn't spray out backwards towards you. Like I said, I've done 5 so far, but with the ones I've done in small puddles, the paint stays mobile enough to be used with a brush for quite some time, so it won't dry up on you really fast when it's puddled like that. So you don't have to worry about rushing. Use that to repaint on any bald spots, and that should dry pretty quickly. If it worked, great. But if not, yeah, if there's a clog, pick the clog back out, put the paint back on, and then take out your UV resin and dryer. I love this stuff. It is so strong. Just after you brush the paint back on again, brush a thin layer of the UV resin over top of the paint that you just repaired, and use your UV lamp to cure it. At this power, 60 seconds should do it, but I usually do 2 minutes just in case. You'll have to do it patch by patch because the resin won't dry on its own, but it will run if it's in the wrong position while you're drying a different spot. So better to take it slow, checking and rechecking as you go. I only use the resin in the troublesome tough spots, not in all the joints, but I suppose you could do otherwise if you choose, if you just like having that kind of security. But now that is officially the end. Hope that helps some of you out. I would love to see projects people do with spray painting, especially fantasy colors. I really love seeing special effects on dolls and stuff. Oh yes, and I just finally recoded my website at Derilly.com, and well, I'm still in the middle of setting up the message boards, but if you want to share your dolls, I'd love to see other people's work, so you can come to Derilly.com if you like, and come to the boards, post your pictures. And all my tutorials are there. I have no ads on the site. I'm going to be looking for other people's tutorials too, to link to in the message boards. So I'd love to see you there, but if not, then happy modding! May the creativity flow. Bye bye everybody!